This happened to me in December 1969. I am a retired RN. I've experienced or witnessed many things that are beyond understanding, but I am also a critical thinker. My story changed my limited view of reality forever. I was with my high school boyfriend on a typical Friday date night in Jeffersonville, Indiana. After socializing with friends at the local hangouts, we would ride out on the rural back roads between downtown and my home in a subdivision. There were dairy farms and cornfields on either side of the road for about 6 miles. The few homes along this stretch sat on the back of properties, and there were a couple of equipment paths that led to small open fields, which were our teenagers' parking spots. Past that, the 2-lane narrow road was heavily wooded with no homes or cleared property for 10 miles. This particular road had many curves and hills, which is typical for southern Indiana. Sparse population and teenage driving led to many accidents. There were no cell phones in those days, and if one saw an accident, it was standard to stop, help, and pray for another motorist to appear. It was a very cold December night, and snow flurries began. We left our parking area immediately as my curfew wasn't to be missed. The remainder of our drive to my home was through the wooded area, and on straightaways, we saw taillights quite a bit ahead. As we approached the second sharp curve, we saw headlights shining from ground level and at an angle towards us. We immediately slowed and pulled as far off-road as possible. The grille was damaged, and the passenger side had struck trees. The headlights in the otherwise pitch-black night were blinding. A fully restored, beautiful 1956 Chevy had apparently tried to take the curve too fast and lost control. The car was off the road on its roof. My boyfriend, Greg, grabbed his flashlight, got another for me along with a first aid kit from the trunk, and we ran to assist anyone who might be injured. The headlights had kept us from seeing how many passengers the car held. I clearly remember my heart pounding from adrenaline and my mind fearing injuries as nobody was shouting back to our calling out, and nobody was attempting to get out of the car. I could smell the strong odor of gasoline and burnt rubber. The engine was running and making a knocking sound. Greg got down on his knees and opened the driver's side door, and I opened the back. The car was empty. He reached up and turned the ignition. The engine was now off, and the woods were silent. Nothing made sense. Our headlights and flashlights illuminated the area as we started searching for a possible injured person. The windows were rolled up and starting to fog. Greg had already searched the interior. At this point, our assumption was that the driver must have gotten out, and we just hadn't seen them. We didn't understand why they hadn't answered us as we ran to help or why the car had been left running. We continued to search for a person around the wreck. We tried to go into the woods, but the underbrush and steep embankment were impossible to climb. At this point, we decided whoever was driving may have just walked away. We got back to Greg's car and drove slowly, expecting to find someone needing a ride home or to a phone. We were relieved that the driver must not be hurt but couldn't imagine why they didn't see us and how they had left on foot without us seeing them. No other vehicles had come down the road. The remaining road we drove was covered with snow, and we saw no tracks. There were no houses. We went to my house, where my parents were waiting as I was really late. Greg told my father what had happened and described the car and how beautifully restored it was in case he knew who it belonged to. The whole incident just left us baffled. By the next day, we decided that maybe there was a house in the woods or a side road that we missed. We both were just unsettled by it. We didn't know why we were worried about what now appeared to be a non-event. The next day we went back to the scene of the accident. Both of us felt we would find a house close by that had gone unnoticed or a side road or something. We didn't understand why we were still dwelling on it, but quite the opposite was what we found. The car was still there but had been moved into a clearing in the trees. I will never understand what happened the night the Chevy, whose taillights we followed, hit that curve and rolled. There it was, still on its roof. The damaged grille and front fender were evident. The paint was faded. The tires were completely rotted, and the rims rusted. The interior was dry rotted and covered with mold. The windows were gone, and the windshield was broken, with a baseball-sized hole full of vines growing into and out of the car. The embankment we had tried to search was now a clearing, and further back into the woods was a small abandoned two-room shack. We later did a property search, but it only led us to owners who had bought acreage with a shack and a car on it. All we were left with was a lifetime of questions surrounding a cold December night. It has been years now, but that night still haunts me. I have never openly shared this story aside from telling a couple of people I'm closest to. Even they do not believe me. Not that they would ever say so, but when you really know someone, they don't have to. I believe that for a mere 1 to 2 minutes when I was in junior high school, I had some sort of time slip or involuntary, spontaneous warp into an alternate reality. The only difference between this one here and now that I was able to ascertain from such a brief trip was that in the timeline in which I found myself, I had never moved back to the southern US, where I was born, and instead stayed in the Midwest, in Wichita, Kansas. My family had moved there for a little over a year when I was 11. When I was in 5th grade, my mother and stepfather separated. My mother, sister, and 2 girl cousins who lived with us at the time packed up and moved from the Bible Belt to Wichita. My older brother, who is a good bit older than I am, had met a woman online who lived there and married her. He urged us to come to the Midwest where he had found happiness. So we did. I actually really loved it there. But just as I had started to find my stride and feel like I belonged, after about a year my mother decided to move back to her original tiny southern town. She was having a hard time with her mental health and had reconciled with my stepfather. I reluctantly said goodbye to the city life I had grown to love and my new friends, and picked up right where I left off with my lifelong friends at the school I'd attended most of my life in my hometown. Looking back, I can see that as a defining moment in how the rest of my life went. If I had stayed there, I'd be a different person right now, without a doubt. But at that moment, I was still just a kid. I was sad to say goodbye, but happy I didn't have to completely start over in an unfamiliar place. Now for my time slip, warp, or whatever you want to call it. About a year exactly from the time we returned to our hometown, I was in the 7th grade. It was a day like any other. It was lunchtime, and I stood in line with my peers, just chatting and waiting for the line to move up to get some chocolate milk from the cafeteria. The boy I'd had a crush on my whole life was standing behind me, which was different, but not in a bad way. We were maybe flirting, or I hoped we were. He made some playful comment to the effect of, "You're not in Kansas anymore, Dorothy," which people thought was clever to say for several years after I moved back from Kansas. I smiled like it was new, because crush. I had my back to the cafeteria wall, leaning against it, just waiting for the line to move. Suddenly, I felt a wave of vertigo, like I was off balance and about to topple, but I wasn't at all. My ears began to ring loudly, and my vision slowly faded into black, like when you stand up too fast and your vision blacks out, but more slowly. My head was swimming for a moment, and then it was foggy. When the fog lifted, my vision faded back in from the blackness. My ears were still ringing somewhat, but that too faded out. I was confused and didn't understand what I was seeing. I was still in school, still standing in the cafeteria with my back leaned against the wall. But I wasn't in my hometown any longer. I was in Kansas again. Next to me, and obviously having been laughing and talking with me, were 2 girls I remembered from my time there. They were older than when I'd last seen them, just as I was. These girls were classmates and friendly acquaintances who had liked my accent and loved teaching me curse words in Spanish. But back then, they were not close friends. Now they were. I don't know how I knew that, but I did. These were my best friends in this reality. I registered first the fact that I was here, in this school and city, because we had not moved back to my home state and town. As soon as I did, it was just accepted as fact, like, oh yeah, that's right. Everything since we had left, the last year of events, was undone and gone from memory. Then I was observing my friends, and the friendship and how it grew with these girls came back to me. Not each piece at a time, but like abstract knowledge downloading into my subconscious in large chunks. I can't put an exact time on how long my consciousness slipped into this other me's reality, but I believe it was only a few minutes at best. I had not spoken a word because my brain was processing everything. I didn't get to the point of speaking before the ringing in my ears and dizzy, head-swimming confusion returned. This time it was crazy fast. I literally felt like I snapped back into this reality, like a rubber band. It was as if the universe noticed its mistake and corrected it as quickly as possible. I think the correction put me back at the same moment in time I was at before the slip, because no time seemed to have gone by for anyone else. I looked around and said, "Am I back here with y'all now?" to my crush. He just looked at me like I wasn't making sense and said the line was moving. That was that. Has anyone experienced anything like this or comparable? Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.